Good morning and welcome to the 2024 first episode of Hometown Heroes.
Woohoo!
We've got past the holidays. Mary and I took off a few Tuesdays before Christmas and then New Year. So we're back and we have a special guest. It's always a great honor to have a Vietnam veteran on our podcast.
It is.
And we have the honor of having Jim McCollough. Jim is an Army veteran, and he was an Army aviator. So welcome aboard, Jim.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
And
Quite a story. I was reading through a lot of the stuff I didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
Holy cow, man, have you got a story?
I'm just glad the North Vietnamese weren't duck hunters, or I'd have been in trouble.
You did catch a few pieces of lead along the way, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And so you're from Indiana.
Yes.
Oh.
I grew up in the northwest corner of Indiana,
Okay.
up where it snows right on the end of Lake Michigan. You know, I came down here and people say, "Well, do you miss the snow?" And I go, "Yeah, but I'm getting over it."
Yeah. I saw that you entered through Chicago, which is where I entered because I lived in the suburbs of Chicago growing up. And I don't miss the winters, not even one day. That will can have that stuff.
Yeah.
Did you grow up in the city or on a farm or?
Well, my parents were both from farm families. And so when I was a little kid, we lived out on a farm. We didn't raise anything. We lived out there. But the guy that ran the farm had cattle and all kinds of stuff. So my sister and I, we'd go out with the cows and stuff and mess around. And when I was 5, we moved to town. So I had a little exposure both ways. And all my cousins were living on farms. So every chance we got, we'd go out there. And so I had the best of both worlds.
That's good. That's a good way to get raised, isn't it? I have such fond memories of going to relatives' farms and being around the horses and cows and chickens and snakes and
all the critters.
So you went to high school, finished high school kind of early, didn't you? At 17?
Yeah. As it worked out, I started first grade when I was 5. Back then, you could be 6 years old on or before November 1st and get started. So my birthday was October 28th, so I was just under the wire. And so as a consequence, I was 17 when I graduated high school. And off I went to Purdue. Had a marvelous first semester. I actually passed one course. and I was really too immature, to be going. But anyhow, back then the draft boards were taking people shortly after they turned 18. And I could have gone back to school on probation, but I wasn't really ready for that. So I got to thinking, well, the Army's going to grab me. And maybe if I volunteered, I could find something that would be a better deal than infantry. My dad he was a World War II guy. He said, stay out of the infantry. And he was an artillery guy. But anyhow, I went up to Chicago and I started talking to the recruiters and they said, you give you a bunch of tests. They says, oh, you're doing real well on the test. You can go to OCS. Well, without a college degree, the only 2 OCSs that were available were infantry and armor. And I didn't know the first thing about armor, but I remember what my dad said, stay out of the infantry. And, whether you're wearing stripes on your sleeve or a bar on your collar, infantry is still infantry. So I said, well, maybe not, And they said, well, hold on. You made such good scores here. You could be qualified to go to flight school. And I had never been off the ground in anything. Like I said, I jumped off the garage roof into a big pile of leaves, but that was the extent of my flying. And,
there goes my dog.
But anyhow, I said, well, fly airplanes. Oh, that sounds like something interesting. And then they pointed out to me that 90% of the pilots in the Army are helicopter pilots. And I knew nothing about helicopters, but, it's just kind of a mystery how they fly. And it seemed like this was like in the late late part of the year of 65, it seemed like it was making news every time a helicopter got shot down. I had no idea that they could come down safely without an engine. So the recruiters gave me a book that kind of explained how helicopters fly. And they introduced the concept of autorotation. And basically, you've stored a lot of energy when you climb up in the air, and when you're coming down, just falling through the air will keep your rotor spinning. It's the same concept. If you stick a fan outside the window when you're driving down the road, the air velocity will spin the fan up. So once I found out that you could actually come down, and thinking about it, if you couldn't come down without an engine, they'd have a devil of time getting anybody to fly these things. But my dad had a guy working for him. It was a retired colonel that had flown helicopters in Korea. And he told my dad, he says, flying those things is a pretty good deal, learning how to do that. So anyhow, I came back and I said, okay, I'm in. So I went into flight school, I had to go to basic training first. And of course, it was the middle of winter time in Indiana. It was January of 66 by then. And I got orders to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
I spent a few months in there.
Oh, I thought I died and went to heaven. Here we are going to the sunny South for basic training. Get rid of it. My goodness, what a surprise. It's damp. It's cold. It's just it's a tough place to go. And I got through that. Let's just put it that way. But all of the guys that were being trained as warrant officers had to go through basic training, and then they went straight to flight school. And so I got orders then to Fort Walters, Texas. And I guess that was probably my first time I'd been to Texas, and I knew nothing about it. But Fort Walters at Mineral Wells is really, it was really a nice place to be. The people liked us and so on and so forth. The thing was, we had a lot of stuff to learn. Going from basic training where you're not doing much thinking for yourself to going into a position where you have to not only be trained to fly, but you have to be able to run a mission. So we started off, the first month was no flying. It was like you go to classes on the customs and traditions of the military, classes on map reading. A lot of guys had never been out hiking around in the woods, and so it was a learning experience. But also, you're being trained as an officer. So there was things like when you went to the mess hall, you had to have, it was kind of a cafeteria style thing, but you had to have 4 guys sitting at a table before anybody could start eating.
Right.
So if you had 3 and the next 4 guys in line were all buddies and they were going, you were kind of stuck until you could lure a 4th person to your table. So after a while, we got pretty smart. We get groups of 4. Come on, we're all going to sit together. But we found out that there was no reason to have chairs in a mess hall because you didn't need a back. Your back was not allowed to touch the back of the chair while you were eating. And some people had to be taught basic table manners. I mean, you can't use your thumb to load peas onto a fork, and you couldn't speak with your mouth full, and you couldn't chew with your mouth open. I mean, you'd think that everything that everybody's mother would have taught them would have been second nature, but it wasn't necessarily for everybody. But they had these guys kind of wandering around, and there was always consequences. I mean, if you did something wrong, there was going to be consequences, and it may be consequences for the whole table. So nobody wanted to be the guy that screwed up. But the nice thing about the mess halls was there was no GIs working in the mess halls. It was all civilian, so there was no days off to peel potatoes or anything like that. But we finally got through that first month, and there was a lot of the harassment started because it was going to be a tough course. And if you couldn't bear up to a little pressure, it just wasn't going to be the right job for you. But we went along, and the last Friday of the first month was called pre-flight. The last Friday of that month, they went through everybody's paperwork. You were going to have to get a secret clearance and make sure that you didn't have any relatives still living in Yugoslavia or something. And they got to me and they looked at me and they said, well, you're not 18 and a half. I said, well, so, well, you got to be 18 and a half to fly. So they looked, and my birthday, whatever it was, 28th of April or whatever, my birthday was going to fall on Wednesday. So the next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, everybody was going to be flying for half a day, but I couldn't fly because I wasn't 18 and a half. So they said, oh, don't know if we're going to have to recycle you back to the next class or what, you know. So there was a bird colonel that was running Fort Walter. So the question went to him. So all weekend I sat there not knowing if I was going to stay with my class or what the heck. And the colonel thought about it. And if you miss 3 days of flying, you're automatically recycled. The intensity of the training was just such that if you got 3 days behind, you couldn't catch up. So finally, they decided that I could not fly on Monday or Tuesday, but Wednesday would be the 28th, and my birthday was the 28th. So therefore, I could fly on Wednesday. So everybody goes off flying. They come back all excited and stuff, you know, and I'm sitting there on the bench, you know, learning nothing. And so Wednesday, I finally got to fly. So I kind of started, you know, a little bit behind the curve. And I always laughed about that. You know, you have to be in the military to understand, well, you're not 18 and a half, but 2 days later, you're going to be okay, you know. But I don't know if I was supposed to be gaining maturity or what. But anyhow, I got to fly. And the most difficult thing about flying a helicopter is learning how to hover. And you had to learn how to hover by the time you had about 10 or 12 hours of duel. So you would go off and you'd fly level and make turns and things like that. But part of each flight period was learning how to hover. And I had an instructor that when things got a little dorked up, he would grab the controls and straighten it out. And so I was being trained that nothing, you know, I'm not responsible for this because I've got a guy over here that's going to handle it, you know. So frequently what they'll do if you're having trouble with something is they'll change instructors on you. So I got out there, you know, I was up to about 11 hours and hadn't learned to hover, and you can't, until you learn to hover, you can't be cut loose solo. And solo, or learning to hover, it's kind of you don't just kind of sort of learn it. It's all of a sudden click, it comes on and you got it. And so we went out to one of these stage fields, which has got 6 parallel runways. Well, 3 runways were active and the other 3 were under construction. So they took me out in this 40-acre field. And there was guys in, you know, bulldozers and graders and stuff working on getting the thing straightened out over there. And I got this new instructor and he says, okay, he says, today you're going to learn how to hover. He says, you're going to hover, not learn how, you're going to hover. And I thought, bud, you haven't seen anything yet. So we got out there and he gave me the controls and we're at about a 10-foot hover and pretty soon we're backing up. And now we're backing up faster. And I'm sitting there thinking, we're way past the point where this guy's supposed to do something, you know. And I went and I flew directly over the top of a bulldozer. And this guy looks up and he's wearing a hard hat. And his eyes are as big as saucers. And I'm looking at him and my eyes are as big as saucers. And there's my instructor sitting over like Buddha. He's not doing anything. And he says, well, are you going to do something? Or are we going to back up all the way back to post? And all of a sudden I'm thinking, holy cow, this guy isn't going to do anything. So I stopped and I was hovering. So, you know, I mean, I begin to, you know, once you hover, you're going to solo. Once you solo, you're on track and stuff. So anyhow, I got past that point and I soloed. And then very shortly after, you had to solo in auto rotations, which power off landing. Now, when you do that, you just roll the engine to idle because if things get screwed up, you've got the opportunity to get power back in, you know. And my instructor, when I soloed in auto rotations, gave me some of the best advice I ever heard. He says, on your way down, if something looks all screwed up, don't try and analyze it. Just wind the throttle up and power out of it. He says, that's why we practice these things with the engine at idle. And good advice. I mean, it's just, that's advice for life. You know, if you get into something, things are all dorked up, don't try and save it. Don't try and analyze it. Just take the safe course, you know. But we got a lot of harassment at primary flight school. And, we used to wonder, well, why are they being so ornery to us? I mean, you don't get a weekend pass if you got so many demerits. And we would polish the floor. Both my roommates were married, and they were intent on getting a weekend pass because their wives were living in town. And they wanted to make sure I didn't do anything that screwed up the marks in the room, But they would come in there and they would take your reading lamp on your desk, disassemble it, and shake something out. And if a dead bug had got in there and died, on your nice desk, they would take a black grease pencil, circle the dead bug, and then write a note, dead aviator requires military funeral. 15 demerits, failure to follow instructions or not up to standards or whatever, any demerits came in 15 number, they were all major demerits. So if you had a dead bug, you had to have a military funeral. And before you could have a funeral, you had to have the death certificate. So you had to somehow figure out what kind of bug it was and what his name was, and then get a matchbox, put a wad of cotton in there, put the dead bug on it. And it took 3 guys to bury a bug, because you had to have somebody conduct the service, a couple of pallbearers. I mean, total nonsense, but it had to be done, and it had to be done in a certain way, and we're sitting there thinking, what does this have to do with flying? Well, you do things in a certain way. Whether you understand it or not, you have to follow the procedures. Okay. And after we got out of primary flight school, we were going to Fort Rucker for advanced flight school. And the Army was trying to expand the number of pilots. And so basically, Fort Rucker was full to overflowing. And our class was a huge class. I decided that we would spend 1 extra month in a casual company at Fort Walters and let things get under control at Rucker before we moved on. So we were there as basically the world's largest casual company, and so everybody had to go get a job. You didn't find a job, somebody's going to hand you a lawnmower and a broom or something. So I went back to the company, the third Warrant Officer Kennedy company I'd been in, and I asked one of the TAC officers if I could work down there. He said, "Oh, sure." So I got to know the TAC officers as real human beings, and they were concerned about us. It was almost like we were their kids or little brothers or something, and they were trying to teach us the things that we were going to need to know to stay alive. And they knew that some of us were going to get killed, but they were doing their best, and it gave me a whole different perspective on the TAC officers. They're really, really, really good guys.
They've probably been, some of them have been Vietnam, Korea.
All of them been in combat in Vietnam at this time, because this was in '66, so they'd all been over there.
And at Fort Walters, during your training, you did lose a member or so, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a training accident, and one guy was killed. And that was pretty much a surprise. I mean, people don't normally get killed at Fort Rucker, or excuse me, at Fort Walters, but it was just an unfortunate thing. So there was around 300 of us. So one guy got killed, and I mean, you're just kind of thinking that's not supposed to happen, but it's also a reminder that it's a deadly, I wouldn't say a deadly game, but it's a deadly thing that we're working in. Aircraft can kill you.
Yeah, very dangerous. And then at Fort Rucker, you lost some more.
We did. At Fort Rucker, there was an unfortunate accident where 2 students and 1 instructor were flying Huey and got killed. And the thing was that when you got a big aircraft like a Huey, big compared to the little bug smashers we were flying at Walters, you'd have an instructor in the left seat. You typically fly a helicopter from the right seat, so the student pilot would be in the right seat, and then in between them would be a jump seat. So you could put another pilot in there, and it was really a good way to learn, because you could see what was going on and listen to it, but you were not under any pressure to perform. So it was 2 students and 1 instructor that and it was a mechanical failure of the aircraft. The mast broke. Just, things are not supposed to happen. The aircraft had previously been in a crash and the mast had been damaged, and maintenance had not picked up on that. Everything seemed to be okay, but it was the first flight after the maintenance test flight that on takeoff to the rotor separated, and of course then you just ride in a kerosene can to the ground.
And that's a big wake up call for everybody. Like you said, that's a dangerous occupation. And I can remember whenever I was in the air ambulance unit at Fort Sill, we were in a big balloon hangar, and a Cobra crashed, and the NTSB and the Army brought the wreckage and put it in our hangar to reconstruct it.
Yes.
All day long we'd have to walk past that wreckage, and then get out in the helicopter and think, is that going to happen to us?
Yeah. Well, I had a negative experience where we were transferred from Fort Walters to Fort Rucker. We were given a couple of days to drive. I don't know, it's 800 or 900 miles, whatever it is. And so I had an MG sports car. I mean, if you're a pilot, you're supposed to have a sports car, right? My dad loaned me the money to buy one when I soloed, because I knew I was going to graduate then. And so a buddy of mine and I were going to take my MG and drive. Well, I had two other friends that had motorcycles, and one of them shipped his motorcycle, and then the other one decided he'd double up, and so there were going to be two on this one bike, and they kind of asked if they could tag along with us, and we said fine. So we got somewhere over in East Texas, and one guy was getting tired of riding on a motorcycle, so we stopped for gas or something, and so we did a little swapping around. So I ended up on the motorcycle, and the guy that owned the motorcycle had put new tires on it before he left Fort Walters, and somehow or another, the guy that installed the tire had screwed up and pinched the tube between the tire bead and the wheel. And when that let go, when it failed, it wasn't like a slow leak where you could feel it and get slowed down. It just went from normal to poof. And we're doing about 85 miles an hour and just past a semi when this thing let go. And with a totally flat front tire, you're basically a ballistic missile. It's hard to do a lot of turning. But we had just passed the semi and moved over in the right lane, and this semi driver was ripped. Here this motorcycle goes buzzing by him and then slows down immediately. So he swung around, and from the right lane, the bike kind of drifted over, and the handlebars got hooked on the truck about even with the back wheels of the trailer, and turned the handlebars 90 degrees, and the bike went down hard. So fortunately, the Army makes you wear a helmet, so I was wearing a helmet, and something, Kickstarter or something, went through my left leg, and I was pinned under this bike sliding along on the pavement. I was on I-20. It had just been open for a few months, so the concrete was nice and rough. So I lost some hide on my left side, and just as I came to a stop, the bike hit something and jumped up and pulled. My leg got disconnected from the bike, and I was in the left lane. When you're laying on the ground, hurting, and you look up, there was a semi coming in that lane, and the feeling is that he's 50 feet away coming 200 miles an hour, when in reality he was probably a quarter mile away doing the speed limit. But anyhow, I started crawling out of that lane, and I crawled across the median, and of course I was not fully cognizant of what I was doing, but I started to crawl out in the lane for the westbound traffic, and said, no, that isn't right. So I turned around, and then I said, well, why am I crawling? So I tried to stand up, and my leg didn't work right. So the first guy that stopped was as luck would have it, this was before cell phones and everything. He was a doctor who'd been in the Navy, and he had a CB radio in his car. So before he even got out of the car, he made a call for an ambulance. So he comes over, and I don't know how he knew I was in the Army, but anyhow, somehow we chatted for a minute, and he spread out this Navy blanket. He says, "I hope an Army guy doesn't mind laying on a, you know, any blanket looked pretty good, you know." So I was laying there waiting for the ambulance to come up. Of course, as soon as his doctor stopped, a whole bunch of people stopped, and it was midday or something. Anyhow, the sun was in my eyes, so I had my eyes closed, and this lady comes up. And she goes, "Ooh, is he dead?" That got my attention. So anyhow, these two guys picked me up in the ambulance, and we're running down the road heading for Monroe, Louisiana, which was a few miles away. And I hurt so bad I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I started telling jokes. And so we pulled up to this hospital, and we're all laughing, you know. And the guy that was driving the ambulance, he turned around because they had checked my driver's license and saw I was from Indiana. So we get up there, and the guy says, "Damn," he says, "no wonder you Yankees won the war." But anyhow, I spent a day or so in the hospital, and then the guy that had the motorcycle, he rented a car, and we put a trailer and put the motorcycle on that. And so away I go. So when I reported into Fort Rucker, I had a broken leg. Now, there's two bones in your lower leg. The tibia is the big one that carries the load. The fibula is the little guy that allows you to move your ankle. Anyhow, I'd broken the little guy in two places, but they put 85 stitches in my leg. I remember one stitch per mile an hour. So consequently, when I ride motorcycles today, I always wonder how many stitches do I want. And it kind of keeps me a little, you know. But I reported into the flight surgeon, or reported into the hospital, and immediately they grounded me. You know, broken leg and all these stitches and stuff. And they couldn't put a cast on it because the wound had to be treated. And I remember when the guy had a hole in the back of my leg, when the doctor said it, he just put a rubber glove on. He looked at the x-ray and put his thumb through the hole and kind of pushed on the bone and says, "There, that ought to be about right," and stitched me up. So the doctor, the Army doctor, said, "Well, you're not going to be able to fly." And I thought, well, wait a minute now. Then, you know, I'd been with all my buddies, and we were a pretty tight unit, and I didn't want to get recycled and have to go to another class. So I thought about it, and that phase of flying was all dual. It was a basic instrument training. So flying dual with a pilot that had to be responsible for the aircraft and pedals that were hydraulically boosted, I thought, well, why can't I fly? So I finally told we had a 0 week there to get acclimatized to Fort Rucker. So I told the doctor, if I can't fly, I'm going to quit. And of course, by then the Army had invested a lot of time and money, and you're halfway through flight school, and you'd made it through the rough part. Mm-hmm. And he says, "Oh, you don't want to resign?" I said, "Well, of course I don't. I want to fly, but I want to fly with this group." And I laid out my reasons. So the doctor called what was going to be my flight commander, and they talked it around, and they said, "Okay, we'll let him fly, but to be on flight status, you can't take pain medication," because I was taking
Mm-hmm.
It's like M&Ms,
Mm-hmm.
And if my broken leg wasn't going to be an excuse. If I couldn't keep up, or if I complained about the pain or anything like that, bingo, it was on me, and I was out. Going to have to wait for the next class. So I did basic instrument training with a broken leg.
My goodness.
I always knew what spot to bring the aircraft back to, because it was the spot where the crutches were. And, they took me off my pain pills, and it was painful. I mean, my leg. But when you're flying instruments, it's all mental. You have to just focus on what you're doing and not let anything intrude on your thoughts. So that was pretty straightforward. I mean, I think I made the best grade in the class on instruments, not because they were feeling sorry for me. I just total concentration, it was just, boy, I couldn't stand thinking about my leg or anything else. And I'll be honest, I had a good instructor. Your good instructor is one that can communicate with you and tell you what you're doing wrong and how to fix it and stuff like that. And I was blessed with a really good guy. So I got through that stage, and the next one was advanced instruments. And by then I was off crutches and in much better shape.
And then from Fort Rucker,
It hurt way worse than that, considering.
Well, the helicopter
just don't
vibrates, you know. And I'd also lost a bunch of skin, so every other day I had to go down and get that treated, and you know. But I was making my own bed, and I was going to sleep in it. I was going to stay with my class, and you know, you'd be amazed. You can be pretty tough if you think about it. You know, if you focus on something.
Yeah, get your mind on something else, which is what it sounds like you did, is you got your mind put on the job at hand so that you just don't think about the pain. It's amazing what the mind can do, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was 19 years old. I was pretty tough.
Yeah, well, that's it. A 19-year-old man, that's pretty much it, right?
From Fort Walter, from Fort Rucker, then you went to Fort Knox before you went to Vietnam, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to Fort Knox. A significant portion of my class, you know, we're in alphabetically, so they just took a certain block of names, and we all got sent to Fort Knox. And they were forming up or reactivating an old horse cavalry outfit, 3rd Squadron, 17th Cavalry. And at the same time, the 7th Squadron, the 17th, was being formed there. So there was a lot of my classmates there, and Fort Knox was just wonderful. You know, all the Mickey Mouse BS had gone away. Now we were being trained to go to war. All of our platoon leaders had been in Vietnam before. My platoon leader was a guy by the name of Gary Luck, and he was a great guy. He'd been special forces, and then he went to flight school and went to Gary Luck, if the name rings a bell. He commanded the 18th Corps during the Iraqi War, and he got his 4th star and commanded U.S. forces in Korea. It was, to me, it was always great knowing Gary and what he was. He was all Army, all business. Whatever we were doing was full throttle. He was a top shelf kind of guy, and it was just a real blessing to see him advance all the way up to a 4-star general.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whenever you left with your group at Fort Knox, and then you went to Vietnam, but you didn't fly over there.
They brought an old troop ship, the USNS General Walker, and it had been in the mothball fleet. The last time it had been used was bringing Marines home from Korea. Now, imagine coming home from Korea, you'd ride in a canoe if that was what it took, you know. But this was not a modern ship, but it was designed as a troop ship. And the enlisted guys got to sleep in their own hammocks. The officers, we were in a room, I'd say about the size of my living room, and it had 42 junior officers in there. There was 7 stanchions that were 7 bunks high. And if you ever think about it, do you want a bottom bunk, middle bunk, top bunk? And I didn't want somebody's foot in my face climbing up to their bunk, so I elected to take a top bunk. So, but the bunks were so close together, you could just barely turn over in your bunk without bumping the whatever was above you. And what was above my bunk was a deck that was exposed to sunlight. So it was a piece of steel, maybe a 1/2 inch thick, I don't know. But during the day, it would warm up pretty good, and it would just radiate heat. Of course, there's no air conditioning on the ship. So I had to stay up till about midnight before my sleeping quarters was cool enough to go to sleep.
Oh.
But all of the meals on the ship, there were 5 settings for every meal. So I was in the 4th setting, which means that I had a late breakfast, late lunch, and late supper, which worked out perfect for my inability to go to sleep until late. Army or the Navy ate well. I'm telling you, there was good food, plenty of it, and you know it was really a different world. But the ship was so crowded. I think there was about 6,000 people that were non-crew members on this ship, and we were crowded. I mean, wherever you went, you were bumping into somebody's body. You know, the only place on the ship you could go and have room to swing your arms was each day we'd go up in small groups up on the deck, maybe 100 guys would go up there, and you'd spread your arms out and stuff to where you could do jumping jacks and push-ups and things like that. That was the most space you had. The showers were saltwater showers, but they made a little fresh water, and there was they would publish that the shower rooms were numbered, and maybe from 9:15 to 9:30 in the morning, you supposedly had fresh water. So everybody'd go in there and soap up with salt water. And they turned the fresh water on. And by the time you worked your way out through all these squirming bodies to get out, you'd almost make it out, and they turned the salt water back on. So salt water is sticky stuff to take a shower with, but you get used to it. But we got to Vietnam. We stopped at Okinawa, or we stopped at Subic Bay. We were supposed to go to Okinawa, and there was a big storm in the Pacific, so we went to Subic, and then from then on to Vietnam. And so the ship started up toward the DMZ, whatever the first town is up there, and we'd stop, and 1,000 guys or so would get off, and then we'd spend the night in port, and then during the next day we chug on down and dock up to the next place, and another 1,000 guys get off, and so on. So I was in, I think, the last group to get off, and we went down to a place called Vung Tau, which is not too far from where the Mekong River dumps into the South China Sea. And there was no port there. I mean, the ship anchored a couple miles out, and they got these LCIs, these landing craft infantry, and come alongside the ship. Of course, those things are bouncing up and down like a cork. So they had these little stairways that went down the side of the ship, and the stairway ended, and the little boat would be there, and you'd throw your duffel bag down, and you'd jump on the pile of duffel bags. You better get out of the way, because the next guy's duffel bag was coming right behind you. Loaded these things up, maybe, 60 guys on a boat, ran us up to the beach, door flopped open, and we picked up our bags, and knee-deep water, we wandered up to the beach. I always laughed. It was like, MacArthur, I shall return. We're out there in the middle of no place, carrying duffel bags, walking up to an empty beach that's got a lot of brush and stuff on it. And, of course, we don't know first thing about the enemy situation. We've all got pistols, and there's not one bullet between 100 of us. And so pretty soon these guides came up, says this way, and we walked up to a place where they had put out pure steel planking, and pretty soon these Chinooks came in, and we got picked up, and it was probably 60 miles or so up to Saigon. So my introduction to Vietnam was hanging out the back gate of a Chinook, watching the world go by, and it was really pretty interesting. But thunderstorms all around, it was October, still in the monsoon season. So we got up to Saigon, and they put us on some buses, because we were headed for a place called Xi'an. It's Dian, but it's pronounced Xi'an. Went up there, and on these buses, all the windows had something like beefed up chicken wire on them, and somebody said, "What's that all about?" And I said, "Oh, that's in case somebody pitches a grenade, it won't come in. It'll," and now we're thinking, it's like, gee, we're not in Kansas anymore, are we? And anybody that goes to Vietnam will talk about the smell. It's hard to describe, but, sewage wasn't treated like it is in this country, and there's all kinds of in the warm climate, lots and lots of plants and vegetation and stuff. It's got the whole thing is just an ambiance, a smell that you'll never forget. But got up to Xi'an, and that was the base camp for the 25th Infantry Division. So it had a lot of nice facilities. They put us in some tents that had wooden floors and cots and stuff like that. And to our great pleasure, they had a really nice swimming pool. They had taken a huge fuel bladder and opened it up and used that as a liner for a pool, So I can remember us going out to the pool, and taking pictures and sending them home, war is hell. But our aircraft had not arrived. So we ended up being sent out to other units. The idea was that all of our platoon leaders had been there on a tour, but they'd been home a while, and tactics are an evolutionary thing. They change. So I got sent to an outfit down south east of Saigon. And they were, I don't remember what company they were, but their call sign, they were all Crusaders. And I walked up there, and they had this bridge going into the company area, and the sign over the bridge says, the Crusaders, they said, join the 8th Crusade, kill a Kong for Christ. Well, that kind of signage wouldn't float in the States, but, political correctness was not much known in Vietnam. So I ended up there, and they put me gave me a bunk, and I met all the guys. We had dinner, and they said, basically, this guy you're going to fly with him. So when he moves, you move. He stops, you stop, do whatever you're told to do. So I was sitting there, and of course, I knew nobody, and I was sitting in the bunk that night, and I'm listening to artillery firing outbound, and finally I went to sleep, woke up, and it's go, 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 and I'm going, go where? I mean, I'm asleep, and I'm thinking, am I dreaming or what? And everybody's clumping their boots on, and so I gathered my gear, and I guess maybe we put the gear out in the aircraft the night before. Anyhow, I ended up out in this Huey. And I'm trying to get strapped in, and this guy's starting the engine, and away we went. I didn't know what the mission was, whatever, but everybody seemed like they knew what was going on except me. And we went out somewhere, and some group small group, alert patrol, 10, 12 people, had been discovered by the enemy, and they were trying to close in on them. And so these guys were going as hard as they could to one of the only landing zones in the area. And we went out there, and we landed, and as we're going in to pick these guys up, all of a sudden there's tracers going every which way, and some of them are green tracers. I'd never seen that. Well, that's a Chi-Com weapon. They use green tracers. So we got our guys gathered up and headed back, and I was sitting there thinking, this is pretty crazy. I didn't know the area. If the guy I'd flying with had been shot, I wouldn't have known which way was home. Of course, I was on a frequency, so I'm sure somebody would, But that was my first introduction to combat. So after a week or so, and that was the only thing I got involved in with the Crusaders that first night that was, worth talking about. So we all went back, and we gathered up, and, individual units have different tactics and stuff. So we all talked it over, and so I talked about what we saw. And so pretty soon our helicopter showed up. So we moved from Jiang, which then was our rear area, we moved up to Tay Ninh and started operations out of Tay Ninh. And things kind of started slowly. And one night somebody decided we were going to dump an ambush patrol in alongside a river. And in South Vietnam, when the sun goes down, the curfew's on. Anything that moves at night's a target. And so we were going to put an ambush patrol in alongside this river because the enemy would move things in boats at night and come down the river. So anything that came down the river, our guys were going to shoot. Well, give credit to our enemy. They knew that we were probably going to patrol these rivers. And they knew that in this one particular, out in the boondocks, this one place, there was just one really good spot to land helicopters alongside the bank where you could set up an ambush. So they set up their own ambush. So they were going to ambush the ambushers. So we came in, and this was our first serious combat, and we landed. And our enemy, give them credit, they're not going to shoot when you're on the way in. They want you, if they've got a trap laid, they want you to land. So usually all hell breaks loose about the time you land, and our infantry jumps out, because now we're committed. We either they're going to kill our infantry's going to kill them, or we got to come back in and get our guys. And the lead aircraft, of course, it's all friends of mine flying these things. The lead aircraft landed, and the pilot was a fellow named Jim Kutenkiller, and he took one through the left arm. And initially, we thought that he'd lost his arm, but he didn't. But he was pretty badly hurt. So the fight was on. So we eventually had to go in there and get our wounded guys out, and then pull everybody else out. So Uh, I got a medal for that. And, you know, the medals are funny, you know, and sometimes it's not what you did, it's who saw you do it and so on and so forth. You're doing your job. You know, you're not out there fighting to collect medals. We're a unit. And the infantry was our unit. It belonged to the 3rd or 17th. And we knew these guys. And so when you go out to fight and help people out, what you're doing is you're fighting for your buddies. That's what you do. And we're not gonna leave our guys stranded if there's anything we can do about it. So that's just kind of the way we operated.
Well, the medal you got, was that your Army Commendation for Heroism medal, or?
I don't remember which medal it was. I was decorated 4 times. ARCOM with V is the lowest medal. The next one is an Air Medal with a V.
Is that this is a picture? Is that when you were getting the Air Medal?
Yeah, that was when the Colonel was pinning an Air Medal on me, and yeah, that's what that's what a 20-year-old warrior looks like. You know, I look like I ought to be in high school. But
you know, to be that young and to be around 20-year-olds now, you think, you know, you had a lot of responsibility for a kid.
A whole different world.
Yeah, you grow up when you have to. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And you realize when you're flying an aircraft, it's not just you. There's 2 pilots, a gunner, and a crew chief on the aircraft, and then whoever's in the back. And so I started out flying troop carrying helicopters. It was like popcorn, though. When things started to pop, it started to pop pretty good. So
you deliver the troops.
Yeah, that's what I was doing initially, and then yeah, and the troops. The worst thing to be was between the helicopter and the ground. That was when they felt vulnerable. Now this helicopter is hovering. Even when we smacked onto the ground, they wanted to get out of that helicopter as quickly as they could. So I would say the average time to unload a helicopter was on the order of 10 seconds. I mean, they didn't have seats, they didn't have seat belts. All they wanted to do was get out. And once they were on the ground, they were back in their element. They, you know, if shooting started, you could hug the ground and be much safer than hanging out in the air.
And whenever you're coming in like this, like this picture depicts, that's whenever the enemy starts really firing at the helicopter too.
Oh yeah, because the helicopter is vulnerable and the infantry is vulnerable because they can't really shoot back when they're first getting organized. So yeah, this is the time when things get tough.
And you were in some situations where you got shot up pretty good. Your helicopter did, didn't you?
Yeah, not too long after this, the Tet Offensive was coming up, but we knew nothing about that. So somebody had somehow discovered that there was a large group of enemy troops off in the boondocks somewhere. And so the idea was nobody knew what was coming up, but we knew something. And so the concept was that we would run this B-52 strike over the enemy camp. And then we would come in a few minutes after the B-52s and we would land about 80 guys. And they would run through the camp. And the briefing was, you know, we knew from enemy troops that had been captured and stuff that a B-52's strikes, it's a mixture of 750 and 500-pound bombs. They go off with a bang. They throw a lot of dirt around. They shake the earth. And anybody that's been on the business end of a B-52 strike, they can't. They've got concussions. They can't hear. They can't think. And so the idea was that even though this camp was probably occupied by 1,000 enemy soldiers, 80 guys could run in and out and pull a raid. And basically they were interested in any documents, map cases, anything that would give us a clue as to what these guys were up to. So we got ready to go and we had 5 aircraft and we sent a 6th one out empty because if somebody got shot down, we'd need an empty ship. And everybody had their little extra jobs. I was the armament officer for our platoon. So I told our guys, this is, you know, let's make sure all the machine guns are clean. Every troop carrying helicopter had a machine gun on each side. So we're going out there And we requested permission to test fire the guns, which is all you're going to do is fire a blast of 10 rounds or so, just, the gun pointed down just to make sure that, and whoever was running the show denied permission. Now, he had to be somebody that didn't know much about what was going on. It turned out we went in and landed, and we were up against North Vietnamese. They have very good fire discipline. So our first 5 aircraft landed, and I was the second guy in the first batch of 5. The landing zone was only big enough for 5. Well, there was 2 landing zones, and we called it the hourglass LZ. There was like a thin waist between these 2 little landing zones. So we landed, troops jumped out, and right on cue, all hell broke loose. The only problem with the B-52 strike is they dropped the bombs from 30-some thousand feet, and they missed. They only missed by about 400 yards. So, I mean, if you're dropping a nuke, that's pretty good. But as it was, the B-52 strike had the effect of throwing a cherry bomb into a hornet's nest. And they were ready. They saw us coming. So our guys were in deep trouble immediately. Of course, we dropped them and we left. The second flight of 5 came in, and they tattooed the lead aircraft with a 50, and it burst into flame, and it crashed right where the 2 LZs came together, and the remaining aircraft in that flight left. So everybody was dead that was on that lead Huey, the second flight, and our guys were in deep trouble. We had scouts and stuff down there, and they said North Vietnamese were fixing bayonets and getting ready to sweep the landing zone. So we had to go in and get them. And this is when I discovered that my door gunner had a single-shot M60 machine gun. He cleaned it and put the gas cylinder plug in backwards, which meant the gas-operated machine gun doesn't work very well with the piston backwards. So we landed, and things were kind of tough. And there was a Vietnamese guy, North Vietnamese soldier, and he'd been trained to lead a helicopter. So here he is blazing away with 30-round magazine and his AK, and he's leading my aircraft about 6 feet, and we're 50 feet away standing still. And I'm kind of coaching my my door gunner. He's dicky birding around with his machine gun, and I'm saying, shoot that guy. So the North Vietnamese changes magazines, and how long is it going to take him to figure out that we're standing still? I mean, you don't need to lead an aircraft that's standing still. So my door gunner, about the time the guy loaded his second round, my door gunner hit him in the chest and killed him. Meanwhile, our aircraft is filling up. Now, the infantry was in a complete rout, and they're supposed to get back on the same aircraft that they got off from. Well, the infantry, when they're being pulled out of a real hot spot, they feel like get on a helicopter and you're good to go. So I had the DFC award says 13 people on the aircraft. No, it was 13 grunts, and our normal load was about 9. So we were pretty heavy. And the aircraft in front of me took off, and I was telling the crew chief, get some of those guys, the 5th guy in line was calling, he had nobody on board. And we just couldn't get anybody to go. And so it was, and we were kind of corking the bottle until we got out. The guys behind us weren't going to get out. So basically pulled the guts out of the Huey, but got out of there. And as soon as we got moving, the crew chief called and said the tail boom's covered with oil. Well, that's not a good thing. You got engines, transmissions, but everything needs oil. So we broke out of the formation, and we had been briefed that there was a fire support base close by that, you could go over with wounded guys and so on. And it had a little short runway. So we went over there fully thinking, not knowing what was wrong with the aircraft, lined up to land on this runway, and all of a sudden it lit up with mortar fire. The North Vietnamese had their ducks in a row. So I thought, well, there's a ditch alongside the runway, but if you land there, that's maybe we land a helicopter and roll into the ditch. But the guys that have been hit, that isn't going to be any real benefit to them. So I thought, well, this thing's running. We're going back to our forward area at Suida. And so we were in jungle, but it was like a dot, dot, dot. You could see a chunk of road, and then it was kind of overgrown. And so I decided that road was going where I needed to go. And if the thing quit, I'd land somewhere on that, try and hit one of those open spots on the road. So it was kind of funny, you know, everybody knew we were in trouble. So the guys that weren't flying that day, they were all lined up at the runway at Suidow with their camera to watch us coming.
Oh my.
So anyhow, the aircraft was pretty badly damaged, but anyhow, we managed to make a run on landing and you know, so I got a distinguished flying cross for that day. But that night I couldn't go to sleep. I closed my eyes and I kept seeing this North Vietnamese soldier changing magazines. And I mean, he's 50 feet away. I mean, I could have shot him with my 38, you know. He was probably more than 50 feet, probably 75, 80 feet, but still point blank range for an automatic rifle. And he could have just swept our aircraft. And we lost some gunships that day. The gunships, when we were getting the people out, they lined up nose to tail and they just came down and hammered the left side of the landing zone. And that pinned them back enough to where we were able to get out. And all of us got out. And we got all of our people out. And but I thought, holy smokes, sitting still, doing nothing while somebody is just blazing away at point blank range, I couldn't handle that. So I went to the weapons platoon leader the next morning and I said, you had to volunteer to fly gunships. And even though the gunships had taken worse casualties than we had, I said, I want to fly guns. You know, I mean, I want to give better than I get or something. I mean, to me, shooting at somebody as you move along is a better deal than standing still loading people. So I went into the weapons platoon. Next rattle out of the box, the Tet Offensive started. So I was a brand new co-pilot in the weapons platoon, and here came Tet. And you talk about on-the-job training. The first day of Tet, we had 8 flyable gunships. And when the sun went down that night, we had 0. Guys went out and, you know, we spent all of our time looking for the enemy. And when they want come looking for us and stand up and on their hind legs and fight, it was a pretty amazing thing, especially the first week of Tet, you know. After a while, we were killing them with a ratio of about 10 to 1, and they were running out of people faster than we were running out of bullets. But anyhow, it was a real learning experience. So I spent the rest of my time in Vietnam flying gunships, and the 3rd of the 17th Cav was the second outfit that the Army decided to furnish with Cobras. This was in summer or spring or early summer of '68. So I'd gotten another medal where I was on the ground I was flying a command and control aircraft, and we landed and we picked up a group of battalion command group that we had to pick up all their stuff, and basically we stripped the bodies. We picked up packs, shoes. They could look at the mud on the shoes and tell where they came from by kind of delayering the mud stuff. But anyhow, during this experience, the crew chief, there was 2 groups of people, and he finished with his group first, and he was sitting on the edge of the aircraft with a captured AK rifle. He'd never had one in his hands. And I'm carrying the last bunch of equipment and bloody clothes and stuff back to the aircraft. And the crew chief, I was walking toward him, and all of a sudden he got a wild look on his face, and he swung this AK around and started firing. And he killed an enemy soldier that was hiding behind a log, I guess, waiting for us to all get back together. And so my crew chief killed a guy and saved all of us. So and my commanding officer was sitting like Buddha over there in the aircraft, you know, and we were doing all the legworks, and the first sergeant was behind the machine gun. And so we got out of there, and we had picked up we picked up their whole battle plan. This is for the May offensive. So my CO and I were now buddies. And so he called me in when the Cobras were coming in, and he says, it was like a big deal. I mean, Cobras were just a showstopper at those days. We'd heard they were air conditioned, but nobody could believe that. They were, because you were in a glass house. But anyhow, he hands me my orders to go down to Benoit to get transitioned into a Cobra. So in 2 weeks, I'm to go to Benoit, be there 2 weeks, and come back Cobra qualified. And I'm thinking, hot diggity dog, And you get down to the bottom, and the orders say that following completion, I had to agree to stay in country 6 months. Well, the day I'm reading these things, I'm down to 4 months. And I'm sitting there thinking, Major, we came over in the same boat. I mean, do you not know how many days you've got left? And he goes, well, no problem. He says, all you got to do is, to pick this up, you just have to extend 3 months. And, with all the stuff that was going on and me being a 20-year-old guy that was not going to make a career out of the Army, I popped off and told the Major I wouldn't stick around 3 minutes to get checked out in an F4. Wrong. He told me that he was not going to have a place for a gun pilot that couldn't fly Cobras. And I said, I'm not going to extend. So he called the first sergeant in and he says, Mr. McCullough will be leaving in the morning. Cut him orders and send him somewhere.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, man. So I go back to the platoon and everybody, when I got called in to see the Major, everybody's wondering what I did this time, and I went down there and I explained to the guys, well, I'm packing my bags, I'm gone, well, as it worked out, bad luck to be the first guy, because the second guy, third guy, fourth guy, whoever he called in told them to jump in the creek. Nobody was going to extend. So what they ended up doing was they brought in a bunch of Cobra qualified pilots that knew nothing about Vietnam, and basically the gun pilots that were there had a walking, talking autopilot that flew the aircraft, and the existing gun pilots flew front seat, made all the decisions, and so I'd have been one of those, except that I was the first guy, and I ended up going to the 116th Assault Company, which is a completely different outfit. It's one gun platoon, 2 lift platoons, and all their job is to move troops around, and no scouts, so the guns had to be the scouts, and so on and so forth. So when I went there, the CEOs made a deal with me. He says, well, because our equipment's different and our mission's different, he says, we'll have you fly co-pilot in gunships for a month, meet all the other aircraft commanders, and then at the end of the month, you'll be a aircraft commander. So that's the way it worked out. So most of that stuff was just normal troop movements, but I got into a deal toward the end of my tour. Without scouts, the gun pilots had to go down and look things over. And so we were going into a village that they had like a soccer field on one side. So when you fly over a village with gunships, you can pretty much watch the people and tell how things are going to be. If everybody just continues on whatever you're doing, it's going to be a ho-hum day. If the people hitch their water buffalo to a cart and start loading their belongings, there's going to be a fight. Well, we got to this village and they skipped all the cart stuff. And I mean, the water buffalo is the most valuable thing they had. And everybody had a noose on the front of their water buffalo and somebody with a stick on the back beating it on their butt. And they were hightailing it out of town. And I said, whoa, this is going to be bad. So I called the command and control aircraft. I was the fire team leader. And I said, we'd not briefed an artillery prep on the landing zone. I said, we better get some artillery on this one. And so that request went to the next highest headquarters. No, that's a friendly village. We can't shell it, So we ended up putting our first lift in there. And so a platoon of lift ships was about 10 aircraft. And so they go in and true to form, they land, nothing happens. Troops jump out and all hell breaks loose. And so like a minute behind them, here comes the next platoon. And what we were doing was putting in, 160 guys as a blocking force. There was already some fighting starting up on the other side of the village. So I because our guys were taking all the fire from the left, I said, well, I'll take the left side, and I assigned one of the guys the right side of the LZ and somebody else the far side. And we're going to come in there and escort our group of guys. Now, here's a picture. Well, everything was going to go pretty normal until I looked up, and I'm flying on the left side of the flight, and I looked up, and we're coming F4, and he was on a bombing run. And of course, when their guys are trying to hit a target on the ground, they're looking down at the target, and then they're going to drop their egg and pull the nose back and go. And so I'm going to end up just about nose to nose with a guy that's coming along. He thinks he's got clear sky in front of him, and here I am. And I say, well, this isn't going to work. Now, things are happening pretty fast. So I'm 400 or 500 feet above the ground, getting ready to do diving fire to put rockets into this bamboo that's along the left side of the landing zone. And all of a sudden, I realized I can't do that. So I did kind of a slam dunk, and I got down 10 feet off the ground, and I kicked in a bunch of left pedal to put the aircraft in a side slip, but then I had to counteract that with right stick. So I'm flying along kind of cattywampus with the nose pointed toward the bamboo, but my path is just above the ground, parallel to the bamboo. And by then, all of our guys are reporting taking heavy fire from the left. So I did something I'd never seen or heard of before, but I was in a position where I just fired rocket after rocket after rocket after rocket running down. And I'm 10 feet off the ground. My rotor is just a few feet away from the bamboo that's about 15 feet high. And my left side rocket is going out about one helicopter length in front of me and going off about 2 feet high in the bamboo. My right hand rocket is hitting the bamboo about 10 feet off the ground, 2 helicopter lengths. So that's giving a nice air burst. And I moved both of my door gunners over to the left side. So they're pouring machine gun fire. And this bamboo is just full of trenches and fighting positions and stuff. Now, all the guys in the bamboo, the enemy soldiers, they're looking out in the field at the helicopters and the infantry that's already there, and they're not expecting a helicopter to come by at point blank range. So we knocked them down pretty good. But now I come to the end of the field, and I've got to do something. And I'm below the level of the bamboo, and my left seater yells, "Pull up!" And I was totally focused on rocket firing, so I pulled up, and the rotor got over the bamboo, and most of the fuselage did. We kind of went through it, and the next thing, we were right on top of an enemy 51 caliber 12.7 millimeter machine gun, and the barrel was pointed just about straight up. And he was out there really for F4s. He wasn't expecting to see me. And we went right across the top of him, kind of diagonally, and he fired. But he was a quarter of a second late. My body had already passed over the muzzle, but 2 of his rounds went up through my right-hand rocket pod. So the aircraft it lit off. I had 2 rockets left, and as luck would have it, at least one of them, the motor lit off. So I've got a tiger by the tail. I've got a lot of thrust coming out of my right-hand rocket pod, and that was kind of challenging. So I flew treetop level across this village, and pretty soon the rocket motor burned out, and we're back under control. And I said, "Is everybody okay?" And there was dead silence. And I looked in the back, and I'd had both gunners, the crew chief and the gunner, on the left side, and the crew chief had taken a hit through his calf, his leg. I think they were standing on the skid or something while they were shooting, but anyhow, he had blood running down his leg, and it was not arterial blood, but I mean, he was bleeding, and everybody was kind of focused on him. So I headed back to our base at Coochie, and I called operations, and I said, well, I'm going to drop my crew chief at the hospital, and then I'm going to maintenance. So I need a new rocket pod, and I need a new crew chief. And so we went into dropped Billy off, and I went into maintenance, and they found another rocket pod. And so I was on the ground an hour and a half or so. They were looking the aircraft over, and it had some holes in it, but no control tubes or, nothing that prevented us from flying. So we got the aircraft going, and the rest of the day was just kind of a blur. But I would have to tell you that was the most devastating, satisfactory rocket run I made in my entire life. And
Hey, Jim, while you were talking, I just want to share that one of the listeners, Gerald, said that your story is so much like his father's that he feels like he's listening to his dad right now. Isn't that something? How that connection of what your experiences were and how it can touch somebody else that's listening today. And then that brings them back to their dad. I thought that was really cool to see his comment.
Oh, absolutely. And there was lots of pilots, and we all fought like tigers to save our buddies. That was what we were doing. There was no political ideology about it.
Yeah.
My dad was a World War II guy, and he's gone now. And there's questions I would like to ask him. He wouldn't buy a Japanese car, and he wouldn't buy a Japanese lawnmower. He didn't like the Japanese very much, but there's questions I would like to ask him, and my son is kind of interested in my career. And I told him once, I said, there's things that probably ought to die when I go. And, but he's very interested, and the war wasn't the most popular thing that ever came along. But I will say that right now, the people that come up to you when you're wearing a military hat that says veteran or something, the people will just come up to you and say, thank you for your service. It makes me feel good. That was not the way we were welcomed home.
No, it wasn't.
And
sadly, but true, that wasn't the way you were welcomed.
So I finished my career in the Army. I went back to Fort Knox, and I was there about 14 months, and the Army came along, and I either had to take an early out because a lot of the pilots were not staying for a career, or I could go voluntary indefinite, in which case I could pick a school and they'd send me back to Vietnam. So I thought about it for about 15 seconds, and I said, okay, I'm out of here. So I ended up leaving the Army, and I went to work for Bell Helicopter. And I worked for them for just a few months shy of 40 years. And I worked an experimental flight test, and I did a lot of aircraft development things and stuff. So I'm one of the few guys you'll meet that actually learned a skill in the Army that, there's not much market for machine gunners unless you want to go to work, for a drug company in Mexico or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I worked for Bell, and I had a great career and met a lot of people, and I traveled all around the world for Bell. And so I'm really blessed for the education I got from the Army, the things I learned, and for learning how to fly. And I worked with a bunch of wonderful people, both in the Army and at Bell. So
you survived the war.
Yep.
And you came back and contributed a lot more to our country by working at Bell Helicopter, making the helicopters. And in talking to you last night, you knew a friend of ours, Dwayne Jose.
Yeah. Oh, Dwayne. Yes.
Yeah, Dwayne we were not on the same level at Bell Helicopter. He was vice president of marketing, and test pilots worked in the engineering department. But when Bell when they developed new products and stuff, it was usually the test pilots that did the development work that went out on the first marketing effort. So when we took aircraft to Paris Air Show or Farnborough or anything like that, that was when a guy like me would interface with a person like Dwayne, who was head of marketing.
He was such a gentle person. I mean,
he was amazing.
He was a World War II pilot, and then came to Bell and was part of establishing the Jet Ranger.
Yes, he was the daddy of the Jet Ranger, which led to tremendous growth in the commercial aviation, both for Bell and for other companies that supported that. Dwayne was kind of old school, though. You know, if you got crosswise with him, he had an amazing command of the English language.
He did.
And he wasn't afraid to use it.
When he got done explaining something to you, there was no confusion about what the message was.
We lost Dwayne. We lost him a few years ago, and he's a guy I really miss. And just a couple of months before he died, he left me a voicemail, and I never have erased it.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I'll be going through my voicemails and hear it and hear Dwayne talking again. But that's part of it.
I really appreciate the roll call organization too. That's
part of the beauty of the roll call.
That's a healing ground for a lot of people.
It absolutely is. And one of our good friends and members, Doug Peterson, he was. Do you know Doug, Jim? He was a.
I can't say that. The name rings a bell, but I can't put a face.
He was a dust-off pilot in Vietnam, and he was at Fort Knox, but probably in the 90s. I think he ended his career there, but he's somebody you need to meet too, because he's another aviator that
he's watching right now. So he's an incredible guy too.
We talked about growing up when you have to, I mean, I came home from Vietnam and I still wasn't old enough to drink a beer.
Yeah.
It
really, Jim, is the stories that connect us, so everybody, I always say that everyone has a story and every story matters, because each of the stories work together, because we have a mission and you have to go accomplish that mission. Yes. And so whatever part in that you play, and people don't think that the folks back home played a big role, but if the people in the States or wherever else in the world they were serving when you were in Vietnam doing your job, if they weren't doing their jobs, they could have impacted your ability to do your job. So every one of those stories and every one of those people in that line all helped that war fighter. They helped you accomplish your mission and come home.
Yeah.
And they're sometimes the unsung heroes.
Yeah. Well, here this fall we had a class reunion, and only 36 guys in our class managed to show up. There's a lot more that are people that are still alive, but I mean they've got health issues or their wives do or whatever. But it was really great. There were some of the guys I hadn't seen in more than 50 years, and we were such a tight group that we could sit down and have a conversation with people you hadn't seen in 50 years and pick it up just like it was been last week. And we had a banquet, and we kind of passed the mic around, and I started laughing. I said, if somebody walked by this banquet, they'd say, who are all these gray-haired old guys, Well, if we'd had this banquet 50 years ago, we were about the time of night where somebody would be calling the sheriff wanting to know who was going to pay for damages.
Yeah.
we were a pretty tough bunch and a rowdy bunch,
Mm-hmm.
But,
wow.
I serve with a great bunch of people, and I have nothing but respect for those guys.
Yeah.
Well, and you did get to tell a few stories to our friend Chuck Hodge. I think you said you spent a day and a half with him, 12 hours or so.
He comes in and he's going to click the video recorder on, and we started talking. And I thought, man, I was going on and on and on and on, because we just kind of hit some of the high points today. And he's going, no, keep going, And I thought, well, he was going to run out of battery or we were going to run out of tape. He came back the second day. And
he does an incredible job doing interviews.
Yeah,
he does. He'll spend as much time as it takes to get every bit of your story so that you and your family have that. So you might not want to tell the stories right now, but if the stories are recorded and taped, then later, if your children want to hear them, they can hear those stories.
Yeah, and I suffer from PTSD, and just getting things out and talking about them is really therapeutic.
Yeah.
And we have another friend we had on just a few weeks ago, Kelly Krager from Texas Tech University with the Vietnam Center there.
Right.
And he's an oral historian, and I know he'll want to get hooked up with you. He won't do, a day and a half of interviews, I don't think, but they're very interested in talking to our Vietnam veterans. So we'll get you and Kelly hooked up.
Well, he might want to get a hold of the tapes that I already have and just filter through that.
Yeah. Typically, I think his interview is just a phone call kind of interview. So,
Okay.
And that's
he's capturing things for Texas Tech so that they're using those in. I think they're using some of those in some teaching in some of their courses, even
Yes.
information.
And at Texas Tech, the Vietnam Center, I think he said it has the largest archives of Vietnam history. Only, the National Archives is the only one that's larger than that. So those stories are very important.
I warned you, Rick, I would go along.
Hey, you deserve it. You were there, you fought the fights, and we need to hear those stories because it's important. That was a war that was a very unpopular war, and like you said, came back and you weren't received well at all. But the Vietnam veterans are surely some guys that are very honored now and loved and respected.
Well, the thing everybody needs to know is we fought like tigers, and the war did not end up the way that we envisioned it would. But that was not any stain on the guys that were fighting.
No, it wasn't. It was a political, it's like the other wars, the politicians fight the wars and,
Well, and I think the other thing is that, veterans, whether you were in combat or not, you're still a veteran.
That's right.
And we go where we're assigned to go. We do the job that we're assigned to do.
Yeah.
And if you're a veteran, if I'm hiring a guy and the guy's a veteran, I know some things about him right away. He can tell time. He knows the difference between rights and privileges. And the other thing is that he spent a lot of time away from home and family. Being a veteran is a lonely thing. And you gave up a lot of your life, years of your life for your country.
Yeah.
And regardless of what you did when you're in the military, I think it's important to recognize people that they made a sacrifice for their country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we've enjoyed having you on the podcast today, Jim. I look forward to getting with you and hearing some more stories.
Absolutely.
I'd love to have a few more.
Well, some of them I try to stay away from the ugly.
Yeah. But thank you so much for being with us today. And we've got roll call coming up in a few weeks. The reservation line opened.
We're over 300 already RSVP'd.
Okay.
So if you haven't RSVP'd yet, you better get after it.
I better get in
really
there.
Pretty
I
simple.
haven't pushed the yes button yet. I will.
Better push the button.
All right.
That was yesterday. We were at 300 yesterday.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and we opened it on, I think it opened, Bill Henry just chimed in. He needs to hook up with
He needs to meet you. He spent a little time over there in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So
yeah.
The guy that usually wears the Cav hat there.
Oh yeah, I met him. I complimented him on his hat. I like that hat.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
But yes,
those are $100 hats,
Yeah. The luncheon is coming up, and it's going to be a little bit different as we don't have a dedicated speaker. We have some real neat things that we're doing. Every January we do our Vietnam veteran pinning for those Vietnam vets that have not yet been pinned. If you're and I'll be sending something out to get everybody to respond, so I kind of have an idea of how many we're going to have. But we are going to do that a little bit differently with actually reading, because we haven't done that in the past. Actually reading the proclamation that comes with that. So we'll be doing that, and we'll be bringing up those veterans to be pinned. If there's any vets that have lost their pins or their certificates and need a replacement, we'll be able to provide those as well. We also have one of our World War II veterans, Vernon Mitchell, who will be receiving a decoration from the French. And so there is a group from France coming in to honor him for his service in World War II over in France. And then we are going to close out our Operation Paul Schwartz in kind of a unique, neat kind of a way, because, you know, our goal was to raise $35,000 because we had our generous donor, Mike Reppert, who and his wife, who said, we'll write a check up to $35,000 if you guys can raise that much. Whatever you raise up to $35,000, we'll match it. So that was the first time we ever did a matching campaign, and the generosity of all of the folks that was shared with and the people that love and honor Paul. We far exceeded, not in my wildest dreams did I think that would happen, but we far exceeded the goal of $35,000.
And you did pretty quickly from December to the 31st of December.
Right. And we hit the 35 before the 31st of December. So it was absolutely amazing. So we're going to close that out properly at the next luncheon. So it's going to be really neat and a lot of things going on. But we do need folks to RSVP. We've had a lot of folks that we know of that are in the room that did not RSVP, and they're taking a seat away from someone who did. And this lunch is going to be very full. And so we're changing up some procedures for how we bring people in the hall to try to hold the people that did not RSVP until we seat everybody who did. And then if we have open seats, then we'll let those folks in that didn't RSVP. But we absolutely are just going to be jam-packed. So real important, if you want to be at the lunch, make sure you get out there RSVP. If you have trouble, contact us on the info@roll-call.org or call us at the number that's on the website, and we'll be happy to walk you right through it. And if you didn't get an email, you don't know where to go, just go to our website, roll-call.org, and right below the mission statement, and great big, now we moved it up, we made it big. It's a big blue button, says RSVP. Just hit that and answer the questions. And remember that you are always guest one. And if you're bringing anyone else with you, then they're 2, 3, whatever numbers you're bringing with you. So we look forward to seeing folks, and it's going to be a great lunch.
Very good.
All right.
We'll get Jim to talk at one of our lunches. We just have to give him a shorter timeline, so we have to be very particular.
Jim, thank you so much for being here today. And Mary, it's good to see you. We had a little hiatus for a couple of weeks. Enjoyed the holidays, and we're back. So
we're back.
We will see you next week on Hometown Heroes.